Welcome to another episode of the Vets and Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Will Curtis, and I am joined by not just an agent, but somebody moved into the tech world as well, still in around agency, former Marine, or I guess there's never really a former Marine, Michael Lorino. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being willing to share your time.
Hey, Will, thanks so much. I really appreciate the invitation to come on the podcast. Always exciting to talk with other vets and kind of share my experiences, and definitely look forward to answering questions and seeing where the conversation goes.
Yeah, so tell us, what did you do in the Corps?
Yeah, so I recently retired. I guess recently it's about 2021, so about 4 years ago. 20 years in the Marine Corps. I did intelligence. So I started off in the aviation intelligence side as a squadron intelligence officer, and then I transitioned to more broad brushed, we call it Marine Corps, MAGTF intel. So pretty much the gamut of intelligence operations, from ground intelligence supporting maneuver units in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq to strike operations in Libya during the Arab uprising in 2011. That was my unit. Uh, most recently, before I retired, I worked at the Pentagon, and I worked to develop Marine Corps ISR capability. Marine Corps flies MQ-9 Group 5 UAS platforms, and so I ran that multi-billion-dollar portfolio for the Marine Corps, and it's basically implemented sensor capability across the globe in support of Marine operating forces. So that was my last job before I retired.
So you go from that into real estate. Was that the dream? That sounds like a little bit of disconnect. It sounds like you should be working for the CIA and doing secret squirrel stuff and not necessarily selling houses. What was the reason for the transition?
Yeah, so actually, the transition occurred 15 years ago. I got my real estate license in 2008
Hmm.
while I was a captain in the Marine Corps. And it was during, if you remember, during the was it the housing crisis, subprime mortgage fallout in 2008, 2009. So I had was stationed in Quantico, Virginia, Marine Corps base Quantico, Virginia, and I had orders from Quantico down to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and I had purchased my first home as a lieutenant just a few years prior. And when I had orders down out of state, down to North Carolina, I needed to sell my home. Well, after the housing crisis and homes values just plummeted, I I I needed to sell my home, but I have a security clearance. I needed to. I didn't want to do a short sale, or didn't want to obviously to let my home go into foreclosure. So
Hmm.
I did some research and found this program called the Homeowners Assistance Program. It was run by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it was designed really to support the BRAC, the base realignment and closing model. So when bases close, the government will buy up housing from the service members who are stationed in and around that base. And so this was an extension of that program, which basically allowed veterans or active duty service members who had orders, the government would basically pay off the difference in what you can sell your home for versus what your mortgage was, and you'd be whole on the sale of your home. So I learned about it and I applied. I was one of the first ones in the country to apply for it, and I was like, "Wow, this is awesome! I'm going to be able to sell my house and get a check from Uncle Sam for $120,000 to pay off my mortgage." And I wanted to do a short sale, and it was approved. I was one of the first ones in the country to get that approved. And as soon as I got approved, I'm like, "Hey guys, all my buddies, all my Marine Corps buddies that also had orders to California and Japan and wherever they were going around the world, they said, 'Hey Mike, can you help me? Can you help me do the same thing?'" And I just got my MBA, and I'm like, "Well, maybe there's an opportunity here. So let me get my real estate license, and I'll help you list your home for sale, and I'll formally do this as part of like a little entrepreneurial endeavor." And so I got my real estate license in late 2008, and then within 6 months of being licensed, I had 6 listings. All my buddies, I helped them get their homes sold, and that's how I got into real estate. So been actively in real estate since. Uh, Basically, I was doing it part time on off hours and on weekends. Just so happens my clients who work also are only available off hours and on weekends. So many of my clients over the years didn't even know I was in the military. Working from a skiff inside of a secure compound with no windows and no access to phones. And I was still running my real estate business. And then I brought my wife into it later on, and now I run it full time with my wife as a team here in Alexandria, Virginia.
Yeah, I, I'm always shocked at how you can run, and we've seen this from several of our guests as well, how you can have the time to run a business while you're in the military, and like the the time management, the discipline, the sacrifice that you have to do to go through all that. I mean, is now looking back, do you think it was worth all the time to be where you are now, or do you think maybe if you put more effort into your military career, you could have been further? Like, how did you balance that aspect?
Yeah, so I knew at about the 15-year mark in my career that I was going to retire at 20 years. I had no desire, as much as every general officer I worked for, wanted to offer me command and promotions, and you're the top of the totem pole. You're the guy that we want to keep in service, and I kept getting that told over and over again, and had great fit reps. The plan was, and my wife had kind of developed this plan early on, is like we are going to get out at 20 years. So there's really no plan to take my career past 20 years, and so everything was kind of gearing and lining itself for this transition. So at the time of my retirement, I already had my entire business model lined out. My wife had joined the company, and she was doing real estate. She left her high paying 6-figure salary government job to get her real estate license a few years prior. So 2015, my wife got her real estate license, and everybody thought she was crazy. She left her government job and started doing real estate full time, primarily because my last tour before the Pentagon, I was stationed overseas, and it's really hard to sell real estate when you're 12 time zones away in Japan. So I
Little bit.
needed my wife, and she helped kind of help that transition. But it was a very easy decision for us because we knew we wanted to stabilize. We didn't. My wife grew up, in the military world, and so she never was stable her whole life. So we wanted to kind of create stability for our kids post retirement. So we knew that once I retired, we were going to do real estate, and that was the plan. And we kind of postured ourselves all along. So we built the business in the years preceding my retirement. We had a really good book of business going, and then we just kind of expanded it, and kind of things took off once I joined my wife back into the business full time after my retirement. And then it's been just going full board since. And so now we have a pretty substantial team here in Northern Virginia, top 1% real estate teams nationwide. And we haven't even started talking about the new business enterprise that we just launched 2 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, that again, that just it blows my mind thinking about how you balance the two. And again, we've heard this several times from many folks where we've had one guest who was talking about sitting as a MP or Air Force, so SP, sitting there at the gate in the middle of the night studying for a real estate exam because no cars were coming through. Like that's such a military way of let's go ahead and get it done, let's go ahead and make it happen. So as you already kind of geared that transition, was there anything that kind of shocked you? I mean, you'd already kind of been in the industry at least part-time, three-quarters time, while you still had a day job. Was there anything as you transitioned into full-time retired military that kind of shocked you in that transition?
No, I mean only because I'm a planner. My wife's a planner, so nothing shocked us. I knew exactly what we were doing, and we had been planning on it. We had systems, and we had staff and employees in our real estate business, and we actually own real estate firms here in Northern Virginia. I invested in part owner of several real estate brokerages. And that was kind of ongoing as part of the transition plan. So my military transition started about 4 or 5 years before retirement. And so this was kind of a longer term, and perhaps maybe that answers your question. Is I always talk with whether they're enlisted or officers, my peers, as to kind of what your plan is post military career. And I think the ones that really struggle the most are the ones that really don't know what they want to do, and all of a sudden they're coming up on their retirement date, and they're a couple of weeks out from retirement, and they don't really have a plan in place. And those folks really are stressed out, right? So I always, advise, whether my peers or the Marines that I worked for me, is like, when you decide that you're going to transition out of the service, like, you really need to think about what is it that you really enjoy doing. How do you like to spend your day? What activities do you enjoy doing? And then try to pursue a career in those activities. Now, hopefully, it's something that you can earn a living and make money. but also start looking at who's doing that right now, who can I connect with, build a network around that, whatever it is, and then have that plan in place so that the transition is easy and seamless, and so you're not stressing about what you're going to do when you retire, or if you leave the service before retirement. And that's why it was easy for us to transition. My wife and I knew what we were going to do. It was like, how many days left until my retirement date? Like, we were looking forward to that day so that I can transition and start working the real estate business full time.
Yeah, I I think that what I'm taking from this, and what I think another veteran could sit down and look at it, is that you already planned on a career outside of the military. Whether you did 10 years, 15, 20, 30, you already knew there was a life outside of the military that you needed to start prepping for. And I think I would agree. I think many of us, I did almost 6.5 years. It was like year 4 or 5, and I'm like, I think I'm going to get out. I think I'm going to start figuring this out. And then it was okay. Now I've got 18 months. I got stop loss, so I had a little extra time. But I was very quickly now trying to go and figure out what I'm going to do. What is life going to be like uh, from there? Which you had a 4 year, 5 year runway on somebody like me. And granted, I didn't do nearly the same amount of time you did. But I think if I was a service member sitting here, the biggest thing I could take away from this is that there's a life outside of the military, whether it's in 4 years or 40 years. I need to start prepping for that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Will. And I would offer up anybody who's kind of in that position now, and maybe they're getting toward the tail end of their career and they're thinking about, what am I going to do with my career afterward? I would, before the decision is made to retire, or before the decision is made to leave service, if you're only on a 6 or 8 year contract, think about what it is that you want to do with your time and how you want to spend your professional life post military, and really think through that. If you have a spouse, have the conversation with your spouse. If you're a single person, really think about what are those activities and things that really you gravitate towards that make you happy. What do you like to do? Do you like to be around people? Do you like entrepreneurial things where you build businesses? Do you want to work inside a government service, maybe as a civilian or a contractor, right? So think about the things that make you happy and what you want to do with your career before you make that ultimate decision to leave or retire or get out, right? So it's not that shock where you decide, oh, I'm done, and then now you're approaching that last day of service and you're like, holy crap, what do I need? What am I going to do afterward? Like, you really, I always advise folks, think about what it is that you want to do first before you pull the trigger and line everything up for retirement or post career, sign the paperwork to leave service.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is that there's so many trainings that you can do inside the military that have an applicable um, transition outside. And I got just dumb luck. I got sent to the unit movement officers course. So basically doing all the shipping and receiving back and forth, all the packaging, how boats get loaded, planes get loaded. And I remember sitting through this class going, dear God, I don't want to do this. It's so many extra hours I'm going to have to work getting ready for deployment. I want to spend the time with my friends and my family. And here I go, 3 years, 4 years after that, I walk onto my first industrial property that I'm listing, and they're talking about, oh, hey, here's the railhead, here's all this. And before I realized it, I was talking their language. Like, I knew exactly what was going on. It would have never thought that training would have transitioned. And had I been more deliberate, I could have sat down and thought, hey, this could be this, or maybe I was working on this certification or that certification that the military is going to pay for, and start getting some of that training much earlier on. Again, having that plan outside after the service.
There you go. Yeah, and that's the key, right? Starting early, and I'm a big fan of SkillBridge. I have a lot of friends who have done the SkillBridge program. I think that's a great program. I would encourage anybody to consider that. Or if you know what you want to do, ensure that you maintain those relationships, and have a plan, right? Just have a plan. So when you're sitting at the transition seminars, that's not the time to when you're less than 30 days out from leaving service, like, probably a little too close to start thinking about what you want to do. Hopefully you have at that point a plan in place.
Yeah.
You want to transition. I want to make sure we have some time. I want to talk to some folks about some really cool things in real estate, right? So I'm a real estate agent. I run a real estate team. One of the things that I had started doing back in 2022, 2023, when everyone who has familiar with real estate knows, the days of 2%, 3% mortgages is long gone. And so when we started seeing those interest rates going up in kind of the fall 2022 timeframe, I had a lot of military service members who are PCSing, into the National Capital Region here. Maybe they're stationed at the Pentagon, and they would work with me to buy a home. There was a lot of stress with interest rates, and frankly, interest rates are still pretty high today. When we say high, they're really actually average. If you look at the 30-year average of what the U.S. mortgage rates are over the past 30 years, they range roughly between 6 and 6.5% for conventional loans, slightly lower for VA mortgages. And we are in that range today, right? So I always question folks come to me and say, "Hey, Mike, we want to buy a home, but we're going to wait for rates to drop." And I'm like, "Well, wait for drop for what? Like what's rates are at their point where they're at the settlement point. This is their equilibrium right now. We might see some minor variations, a quarter point here, a quarter point there, but realistically, where rates are today is what we can expect to see for the time, for the future. The only real reason rates would drop from here is if there's some, cataclysmic event or some economic collapse, another pandemic, another, like I said, economic collapse in the economy, which, all of a sudden unemployment rates skyrocket and the country, has to invest in, mortgage-backed securities and buy billions of dollars worth of bonds to prop up the economy. So short of that, really interest rates are where they are. So fast forward. So now we have buyers that are really kind of stressed out about interest rates. And so part of what I had, realized, or, an opportunity that I foresaw a couple of years back is, anybody who's familiar with a VA loan knows that should know that there's a clause inside of them that allows them to be assumable. And so what I did was I looked at homes that listed for sale, and I was like, hey, I really want to find a list of these properties that have assumable mortgages so that I can help my buyers purchase a home and assume the existing mortgage. So even though rates are 6.5%, I can still help my buyers today purchase a home with a 2.5% mortgage, or 2.25. I got one under contract today for 2.25. And so what I realized was there was no way to find these homes. The MLS didn't offer it. There was no commercial platform. Banks and lending institutions, there was no way. I even contacted the courthouse. Hey, can I get a list of properties that have these government-backed mortgages? And they said they can't provide it. So that's when I launched this new platform called Assumlist. And Assumlist, we now operate in 25 states around the country. We're getting ready to launch in Washington State later this month. And it is now it's the nation's #1 search platform for finding homes with assumable mortgages. So these are FHA or VA, FHA, and USDA loans. And we give access to free access to buyers who work with an agent who's who uses the Assumlist platform, or we work with agents who really want to learn about assumptions to help grow their business. And the agents that are using Assumlist and marketing themselves as an assumption expert really are seeing their numbers skyrocket. In fact, most of our agents are having their best year in business this year. So my team as well, we have doubled our production from last year, when most agents are seeing their numbers dwindle. We truly we're having a record year in sales this year by far, because we're able to help buyers solve this problem with rate lock, or high rates. So we launched Assumlist back in January 2023. And we've been growing it ever since. And like I said, now we operate in 25 states and most metro population centers around the country, primarily, as you would imagine, around military bases, but also around large metropolitan areas as well. So that's there's a lot of questions. We do a lot of podcasts. I'm one of the national partners for Lab Coat Agents, so we do national podcasts around the country. We partner with a couple of realtor associations. We're partnered with a couple of brokerages. So we're really trying to get the word out there, particularly to real estate agents who really want to learn about how they can use assumptions to grow their business.
So, I mean, for those that have no idea what assumptions are and how
Yeah.
that really works, can you walk us through what that process looks like and what an agent would need to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll just to break it down pretty simply. So an assumption is, or an assumable mortgage is a mortgage that allows the buyer to purchase the home rather than taking out a new loan, they assume the existing loan that's already with the house. So any government-backed mortgage, VA, FHA, and USDA loan, by law, is assumable, which means the lender doesn't get a choice. The seller, if the seller wants to allow the buyer to put the offer in to assume the loan, then by law, the lender has to process that assumption request. And what it does is it gives the buyer access to the existing mortgage terms that the seller has on their loan. So, for example, if I had purchased a home 5 years ago and I've got a 2.5% interest rate on my VA loan, I could list my home for sale, and a buyer can come along and assume my existing mortgage and keep the same 2.5% interest rate, keep the same loan terms, which means that if I had paid 5 years of interest on it, 5 years of mortgage payments, that buyer is buying a home with a 25-year remaining mortgage, not a 30-year mortgage that typically would be for a new loan. And also they get to keep the same mortgage payments. So what's really cool is for every 1% reduction in interest rate, or 1% reduction in interest rate translates to a 10% reduction in mortgage payments. So the difference between a 2.5% mortgage and a 6.5% mortgage on a new loan, right? That's 4 points. So that would be a 40% reduction in the buyer's mortgage payment by doing an assumption relative to taking out a new mortgage.
Now, for the buyer coming in, they've got to come in with a little bit more capital on that case as well. So if you look at my home, 2.9% interest rate, but yet we've got several $100,000 worth of appreciation. So that would be
Yep.
I guess the other side from an agent's perspective or from a buyer's perspective is that they're going to come in and put in, 25, 35, 40% down on that home in that case.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So one of the biggest hurdles or roadblocks that I often hear is this term called cash gap. And cash gap used to be an issue, but it's no longer an issue for most properties. And so let's just kind of define what this is. Let's just say you bought a home 5 years ago for $400,000, and today that home is worth $500,000, right? So there's $100,000 difference. Let's just negate the fact that you paid your mortgage, and the loan balance is going to be less than 400,000. Let's just keep numbers simple here. The home you bought for $400,000, you have a $400,000 loan balance. If you list it for sale today, you would list it for $500,000 because, of course, the home appreciated. So you have a $100,000 cash gap. So that difference between the current price and the loan balance is, we define that as what's called the cash gap. It's the amount of equity you as a homeowner have in the property. It's the amount of cash a buyer would need to come up with to compensate you for that equity so they can take over or assume the existing $400,000 mortgage. So if the buyer has that $100,000, great. They can just proceed with the assumption and they cover the cash gap and they move forward. Well, if they don't have that, and a lot of buyers don't have the cash gap to cover that, then in the past, they would often be like, well, it's a hurdle that can't be overcome, so I'm no longer eligible for an assumption. And that's actually false. So we actually partnered with one of the top lenders in the country that specialize in cash gap financing. And when the buyer gets pre-approved to purchase the home, they also simultaneously get pre-approved for the second mortgage. And there's what's called a purchase HELOC. So it's a home equity line of credit. So basically the buyer is purchasing the home and pulling equity out of the home, getting a line of credit on the equity at closing, and then using that equity in the property to pay the seller that cash gap. So what we create is what's called a blended interest rate. So the interest rate on the second mortgage is slightly higher, ranges from about 7.5%, which is honestly not much higher than a new mortgage anyway. But you blend that with the low rate, said 2.9% on your home, for example. So if somebody has a $400,000 primary loan that they're assuming at 2.9, and then they take out a small second mortgage, let's just say it's $50,000 second mortgage, that creates a blended rate would be probably somewhere around 3.3, 3.4. So they're still way better than taking out a new loan at 6 or 6.5, because even with the second mortgage, their combined blended rate is still sub 3.5%. So let's just say, for example, realistically, buyers just need to come up with 10% down. So as long as they have 10% of the purchase price as a down payment, then they can still do an assumption, and any additional cash required above and beyond that can be obtained through a second mortgage. So
Hmm.
what that means is, unlike a new VA loan, as vets, we're familiar with 100% financing, right? Zero down mortgages with VA loans. There's no such thing as 100% financing with an assumption. A buyer needs to come to the table with something. Now, short of there being a zero cash gap, and there are homes out there in certain parts of the country where a buyer could effectively assume a loan with zero cash gap. The home hasn't appreciated since the time that original buyer purchased it. There are homes out there. There's parts of Florida and some other areas where homes haven't appreciated very rapidly, and they may very well be able to do a zero cash gap assumption. But for the most part, a cash gap exists. So what that means is, as long as the buyer has at least 10% down in most cases, the rest can be purchased through an assumption, or through the second mortgage, and they can proceed with the assumption. And what the net gain here is, the buyer is still saving a ton of money, usually four, five, six. Biggest assumption I've done was a $1.7 million home where we're saving the buyers $3,400 a month. I mean, that's
Hmm.
like a $40,000 a year pay raise by doing an assumption,
Okay.
because they're saving that much in interest every year. Yeah, every year. So $3,400 a month in savings. That's one of the largest ones. But on average, it ranges between, say, $500 and $1,000 a month in savings. And just imagine, like, hey, if you buy a home and you could save $1,000 a month, that's a substantial amount of savings that you could put towards something else, right? And that's really what the power that assumptions offer.
No, and that's such a unique product because I don't think there's. I mean, you're saying there's really nobody else out there doing this, or at least nobody that's got the traction you've gotten. You're growing in different states, and I hear from our residential colleagues all the time. Oh, I want something with a lower interest rate. How do we get something with lower interest rate? You've built that platform. I'm curious if you're still in production and you're running this tech platform, this
Yeah.
tech company as well. When do you sleep?
Yeah, the sleep. We in the Marine Corps, we said we're day on, stay on when we're on duty, right? So my day on, stay on mentality applies post military career. So yes, I run a real estate team. We've got 4 full-time agents. Yeah, I can't remember how many homes we sold. I think we're over $60 million in production just this year alone. So I personally have probably closed, I don't know, 20 assumptions, assumable transactions this year, in addition to several non-assumptions as well. Yeah, so in addition to running, the platform, and I just got back from EXPCon in Miami 2 weeks ago. I was in San Diego at the California Association of Realtors annual convention in Chula Vista, California. We've got a couple other events coming up with NAR. So yeah, in the midst of trying to run my real estate team and then sell real estate, I've got a home inspection an hour from now, an hour away on a $1.2 million assumption that I'm helping a buyer with, via a veteran on that one. So yes, I am busy, but I also have a team in place. I've got a couple of showing assistants. We've got administrative support. My wife, as I mentioned earlier, is in full-time business with me as well. I've got some ISAs and other team members who are doing a lot of lead conversion. So by all means, I'm not a single person real estate agent. I run a team, and that team gives me that leverage and that depth. Now, not to say that I'm not busy. I'm certainly busy, but I choose to be busy. I feel good when there's momentum around our business. My wife would sometimes say, "Mike, can you come spend some time with the kids? If it's 6:30 or 7 at night on a Tuesday, and the kids are home, and she wants me out of the office." So there's that component of it too. But just remember, I always tell myself, I could get a job and work 9 to 5 and not have any requirements afterward, but I love being an entrepreneur, and I love building things, and I love growing businesses. And so part of being an entrepreneur is you're always working, right? So we always like to say we work hard during the week and harder on weekends. We don't get off on weekends. Real estate, we're always showing homes. So we got to be mindful of that, and try to balance our lives between, spending time with family and obviously doing the working on the business. And that is a struggle. But my wife and I work through it, and every day we try to carve out time for ourselves and our kids, of course. But yes, we do run a busy life, and I guess that's part of being an entrepreneur and part of being in real estate. So
Yeah, and I like what you brought up because this is the same struggle my wife and I have as well, right? Is that you saying, "Hey, it's time to come home, spend some time with the kids." It's a conversation we have on a very regular basis, and even my wife has put rules in place now, make her sound like she's a tyrant. She's not. She's doing it out of love, but she's like, "Hey, when you get home, no work until the kids go to bed." All right, that's a fair. I can put those 3 hours
Yep.
aside to be present for family, be present for her, to spend the time with her and the family so that we're there. Part of my reason for getting out of the military was because didn't want to raise kids through a deployment. And see, I wanted to be there for first steps, all those kind of things. And she brought that up very quickly. You're going right back to the same lifestyle that you had, but now the government's not telling you what to do. So I think it's interesting that has that been, especially with your wife working in the business, how have you guys found balancing both that personal life, the relationship with wife, running multiple businesses now, and then having a family? I mean, that's a struggle I think many of us have. How have you guys kind of found that balance?
Yeah, I'm lying to you if I said it's easy. So we work through it, and every day it's something we have to put our minds towards. So my wife and I have to schedule who's picking up the kids today, who's dropping them off at school, who's going to be there to take our daughter to swim class, et cetera, et cetera. So
Mhm.
we are always in this constant struggle between time with our family and supporting our clients. And so one of the things we just did with this past year is we hired a full-time salaried showing assistant so that I don't have to go, my wife doesn't have to go to each showing to meet with a client to show them properties. And so we're trying to implement systems to protect our time and look for ways where we can spend as much time with the family when we can. But obviously, we still have obligations, like we have to go to closings, we have to negotiate contracts, right? We have to take phone calls from clients to help them through questions, etc. So yeah, it is. And one of the things I think we're doing now is we're getting to the point where rather than taking on more business ourselves, because this is as businesses grow and as we are growing our business, you will you will burn yourself into oblivion and burn yourself out, right? You'll keep more. I'll take on one more client, one more client, one more client, and I have that one more client mentality where another buyer comes along. Oh, you want to buy $1 million property? I will absolutely help you, right? And I will never say no. And so my wife has gotten to the point recently where just a couple of days ago, she says, Mike, I just took on my last client for the year, and she put her foot down, and she is not taking on any more clients for the year because she wants to spend the last 2 months of the year, with family, with around the holiday season, not focused on doing property showings and home inspections and negotiating contracts. She wants to spend more of it with the family, so she is implementing systems personally to protect her time and encouraging me to do the same, I'll say. So we brought on another agent onto the team, and now we're gonna offload some of those new leads that we're generating to other team members on the team, who will basically, we're just creating leverage for ourselves to protect our personal time. And that there are other ways to do it. You can refer them out. For those in your audience that are kind of listening to this and learning what techniques are best practices for balancing personal and work. I'm not an expert at this, so don't take what I'm saying as gospel, because if you looked at my schedule, I'd probably get a failing mark for the amount of work time versus family time I do on a daily basis. But that said, I do encourage everybody to really look hard at their schedules and protect the time they have, whether it's with their spouse or with their children, or frankly just personal time, just to think, read a book, disconnect, and just take it in, just where you are in life, right? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis that brings happiness? And that, if that means go grab lunch with a friend or a colleague or a coworker that from years past, those are really important things you need to factor into your day-to-day schedules, above and beyond just the next deal, the next deal, the next deal. So I always encourage folks to think through that, particularly in businesses that we are in. Real estate is one of the hardest, most stressful businesses in the country, I believe, because we're always seeking more opportunity. We're always seeking the next deal. And frankly, it's easy to lose track of the things that are really important in life, such as family, right? Our children, our spouses, etc.
No, that's great. I can't think of a way to wrap everything up better. It's a tough transition. I've likened it to the military when you're used to being the young officer or the young private or airman or whatever the case happens to be, and you're the doer. And now it sounds like you're in that position now where you're kind of that mid-grade, officer, that, young NCO starting to move into being more of the manager, more moving things off, being a little bit more strategic. And I remember, military career, that was a tough transition. Even now as a real estate professional, it's a tough transition to start moving some of those things off to others, building more time and getting what you're best at. It's a tough transition. It sounds like you're right there in the middle of it, getting it figured out, as well as trying to balance the family side of things as well. Which to me, I don't know if you ever figured out. Let's have a phone call and a mastermind because I hadn't figured that part out yet either.
I've read some books on this, and honestly, most of my knowledge on this topic comes from my wife. And so, what she really has advised is, really learn to set some hard red lines for yourself. So, one of my wife's red lines that she has implemented and is certainly trying to impose upon me is, at a certain time in the day, you just stop taking those phone calls, right? Whatever that time is, whether it's 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, whatever time works for your schedule, where at that point going forward, you are not answering the phone. Clients can wait till the next morning, after business hours. They can wait the next day, right? Short of some catastrophic, catastrophe that you need to address. My wife is very clear with her clients. I am not available after 6 o'clock, and she won't answer her phone, and she won't respond until the next morning. And she's up ready to go the next morning, and she will be first to respond at 6 a.m. She will be on the phone and following up and getting emails out the door. But what she's done is she's implemented what we call this red line, where she has set that time of the day after a certain time frame, uh, dedicated to the kids and the family. And so I applaud her for that. I'm not quite there yet. I can't set a hard deadline, but what I do is certainly during key activities, whether it's dinner time, I put my phones away. We don't have phones at the dinner table. When the kids are getting ready for bed, of course, I'm there to support my wife, getting the kids ready for bed. So find out what, those that have children or have a spouse, obviously figure out what makes sense for you, but start putting those parameters around your personal schedule, and then hold yourself accountable, right? We as service members like to hold ourselves accountable. And so hold yourself accountable to those activities. And I think you'll be better off for it. You will feel better about you as a person. You'll feel better in your relationships as you hold yourself accountable to ensuring that you maintain that balanced life. And frankly, you won't burn yourself out. I mean, there's several times over the course of this past year, especially during the spring market. I don't know how it is in your market, Will, but in the spring market here in Northern Virginia, during the PCS cycle, right, we have a huge number of military service members, 250,000 families PCS into the National Capital Region every year during the spring months. And our phone just keeps ringing off the hook. Another client, another client, another client. And there were several times where I literally had to take a step back. Like I can't do this. I'm burnt out. I got back to back to back appointments and showings and follow ups, and then the phone's still ringing for the next client, which is I mean, honestly, it's a good problem to have in real estate when you have an unlimited number of leads coming in. But on the flip side of that, you get to the point where you literally just, you wake up in the morning and you dread all the things that you have to get done, knowing that there's not enough time to do them. And that's not a really good, mentally, that's not a good place to be.
No, absolutely. It's a tough transition. It really is. Trying to go through all that. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time and sharing with what you've done. And it sounds exciting what you created. And what I love about what it is you saw the need. It worked with both your business, your personal real estate business, as well as a need for everybody else. You kind of married a sellable tech solution that you needed, which I think is just fabulous. And I wish so many entrepreneurs found a way to marry the two passions of what they're doing. So I think that's awesome. For the listeners, if you guys found value in this one, by all means give us a like, a share, send it to somebody you think that would find some value in this story as well. If you've got questions, throw them in there. I'm assuming, Michael, you're more than willing to jump into the comments if we see anything and give your advice and everything else that questions we may get from anybody.
Absolutely, yeah. If anybody has any questions about Assume List or assumable mortgages in general, I can offer one. Yeah, post a comment. I'm happy to respond. Otherwise, what I would also encourage you to do is go to assumelist.com, And on the main homepage, there's a link for a daily live Q&A. So my head of training, Nora Simpson, she's a business coach, and she will Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, I guess it's 8 a.m. Pacific. She hosts a live, completely free training class. No canned material. It's a Q&A, usually small group. There's only a couple people in there, and it's a one-on-one session. Ask questions. How does assumptions work? How do I get started? Do you have anybody that focuses on assumptions in my market? Tell me more about Assume List. How do I run property searches? So we will take care of you and answer your questions. Anything about assumable mortgages. We offer completely free training to help get you set up. And we're happy to provide that service. So assumeless.com is a great place to get started. And I look forward to the questions.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing resource that you do you said Monday through Friday every day.
Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern. We're on the East Coast, so we host that free training every day. It's a live Zoom class. We call it our morning Q&A. People come all over the country. Buyer, if you're an agent, bring your buyers. If you're a home buyer looking to get smart on assumptions, just show up. We'll answer your questions. If you want to be connected with an agent with assumption experience, we'll connect you completely free of charge. We don't even charge for that, nothing. So really, we just operate as a resource, and we're here to help you out.
And that's an awesome resource. I highly encourage anybody to jump into it, as assumptions are a little bit of an interesting beast. But Michael, thank you so much for your time on this one, and we look forward to seeing what you do in the future.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.